In the early days of Dungeons & Dragons, your character's worth was measured by what they carried. A player's survival relied on a hoarded inventory of enchanted armor, magical swords, and thick spellbooks, as the game's loop prioritized these items over narrative arcs. The standard format for a campaign was the Mega Dungeon. These were massive, disconnected underground labyrinths built for one specific purpose: extracting treasure through violent combat. These sandboxes were static, functioning as obstacle courses for resource extraction. But by 1980, the game's audience was rapidly changing. The player base shifted from middle-aged wargamers to a commercial phenomenon driven by much younger players. Because the existing game functioned as a gear-based power fantasy, it was poorly suited for a competitive environment. Tournament organizers realized that players with the best equipment could brute force their way through challenges, making it impossible to measure genuine player intelligence. This logistical crisis hit a breaking point at Gen Con 13 gaming convention. Organizers needed a way to filter thousands of new players through a multi-round tournament to find the absolute most elite problem solvers. TSR designer Harold Johnson addressed this with a specific philosophical question: are players actually skilled, or does their success rely entirely on the crutch of high-level gear? To find the answer, the design team was tasked with creating a final, grueling tournament round that neutralized the game's mathematical scaling. They concluded that finding the truest measure of player skill would require a scenario that intentionally destroyed the core reward mechanics of the game. The setup for this test occurred at the climax of the preceding adventure, Module A3. In a move that remains controversial, the players were subdued by an inescapable sleeping gas trap. There was no dice roll to avoid it. The story required their capture. When the players awoken in Module A4, they found themselves in a dark underground cell. They had been entirely stripped of their weapons, armor, holy symbols, and spellbooks. They possessed nothing but dirty cotton loincloths. Then a second inciting incident occurred. A catastrophic natural volcanic eruption shattered the dungeon walls. As the volcano began to collapse, the captors fled in panic, leaving the prisoners to die. Removing their gear and introducing a ticking clock forced a change in the tabletop experience. The game became a survival horror struggle for a party that had previously felt untouchable. This chart shows the mathematical reality. A high-level character's combat effectiveness plummeted to near zero once their gear was gone, making standard fights a lethal fail state. Players were forced to prioritize evasion and environmental scavenging, finding usable wood, raw, sticky pitch, or even bone scraps to fashion the crude tools they needed to survive. To keep spellcasters from being completely useless, the designers included a monocle concession. A hidden crystal monocle allowed wizards to use the few magic scrolls found in the dungeon. This gave them a brief moment of utility without violating the no-gear rule of the tournament. This totally enforced vulnerability leveled the playing field for the final encounter. When the players finally cornered the fleeing slave lords, survival relied purely on tactical ingenuity rather than character class or magical items. After the tournament, the A-Series was released as a retail publication. It was an experiment in high-stakes survival that left a permanent impression on the player base. As the audience matured, they demanded more logic in their adventures. A4 answered this by introducing diegetic world-building, where the dungeon was treated as a living, reactive environment. The module featured territorial factions like the myconids and a local cult. These groups didn't just sit in square rooms, they reacted logically to the volcanic eruption, fleeing or defending their territory as the island collapsed. A4 proved to the industry that tabletop environments could be dynamic ecosystems with logical consequences, rather than static maps of arbitrary monsters. This transition marked the start of the Adventure Path, a multi-module continuity where the failures and outcomes of one chapter dictate the starting conditions of the next. This sequential, story-driven framework replaced the episodic sandbox model. It forced TSR to adopt a strategy where modules functioned as interconnected chapters of a larger narrative. We can trace the structural DNA of A4 directly to the sweeping epics of the Dragonlance saga and the narrative-heavy campaigns that define modern 5th edition. Initially engineered as a mechanical punishment for tournament players, A4's real legacy was demonstrating the commercial and narrative potential of the serialized campaign.